The silence in the house was deafening. I stared at the empty space beside me, where he used to lie. The absence of his presence hit me harder than I expected. My heart felt like a hollow cavern, echoing the emptiness his departure left behind. When he told me he was leaving, I didn't believe him at first. His words were like a distant, muffled sound, almost surreal. I remember thinking, this can't be real. He can't just walk away. But he did. The reason he gave for leaving seemed so trivial in hindsight. He was unhappy, or so he said. He no longer felt the same way about me, about us. He spoke of the disconnect that had been growing between us for months, maybe even years. But I never saw it coming. The nights spent together, the mundane conversations, all felt so routine yet safe. How could he feel this way? I couldn't understand. My mind couldn't wrap around the fact that the man I loved had fallen out of love with me. And, to make matters worse, he had already found someone else. Betrayal. That's what it was. There was no other way to describe it. How could he leave me for someone else? The thought gnawed at my insides. He had promised me forever, and now he was breaking that promise in the most cruel way. In that moment, I felt like I had lost everything. My partner, my best friend, the man I had built my life around. He wasn't just leaving me. He was leaving a life that we had created together, a life that I had thought was solid, unshakable. For the first few days after he left, I didn't know what to do with myself. The house felt foreign, like I was living in someone else's life. There was a heaviness in the air, a reminder that he was gone, and I was alone. I tried to keep busy, but nothing seemed to work. I couldn't focus on anything. Even the simplest tasks felt impossible. I would sit on the couch, staring at the walls, my thoughts running in circles. How could he do this to me? What did I do wrong? Was I not enough? As the days turned into weeks, I started to fall into a rhythm of numbness. I couldn't cry anymore. The tears had dried up. But I didn't feel better. It was as if I had emotionally checked out. I tried to reach out to friends, but they didn't know what to say. They couldn't offer me answers, and frankly, I didn't want their pity. I just wanted him back. I wanted him to explain, to somehow undo what he had done. But I knew that wasn't going to happen. So I started to fill the void in unhealthy ways. I began going out more, meeting people, trying to distract myself from the pain. At first, I thought I could just keep busy, forget him. But it didn't work. It never works. My mind always drifted back to him, to the betrayal. I was angry, so incredibly angry. He had taken my life and shattered it. He had shattered me. But what could I do? What was left for me? One night, I went out with a group of acquaintances. I drank too much, laughed too loudly, and tried to act like everything was fine. But inside, I was falling apart. I ended up in a hotel room with a man I barely knew, trying to drown my sorrow with a fleeting connection. In that moment, it was as if my pain had a temporary escape, a way to forget the reality of what had happened. The man didn't matter. What mattered was that I could, for a moment, not think about the betrayal. I woke up the next morning, ashamed. The shame washed over me in waves. What had I done? Why had I let myself fall into this mess? It wasn't who I was. It wasn't who I wanted to be. I had just wanted to feel something other than the hollow ache inside. But all I felt now was emptiness and guilt. I had stooped to something beneath me. It wasn't just the one-night stand. I realized that I had been seeking validation from anyone who would give it to me. I didn't care who they were. I just needed to feel something other than the pain he had left behind. I hated myself for it, but I couldn't stop. The need to fill the void was overpowering. But in that moment, something inside me clicked. I couldn't keep doing this. This wasn't who I wanted to be. This wasn't the person I was before him. I needed to reclaim myself. I didn't want to be a victim of my circumstances anymore. I didn't want to spend my life chasing after someone who had clearly moved on. I wasn't going to let him break me. I was better than this. But first, I needed to face the hardest truth. I had been living in denial. The relationship was broken, and there was nothing I could do to fix it. In the quiet after the storm, I realized that the only person who could heal me was me. I couldn't rely on anyone else to fix what was broken inside me. And that thought terrified me. But it was also liberating. I wasn't going to sit around and wait for answers anymore. I wasn't going to let his departure define me. I was going to define myself. It was time to stop pretending. Time to stop hiding behind distractions and start facing the truth of what had happened. The pain was real, but so was the possibility of something better. I had a choice. I could keep spiraling, or I could take control. And for the first time in weeks, I chose to take control. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep living in this chaos. I had to change. There was a moment when everything shifted. I had spent weeks wallowing in the aftershock of his departure, replaying every interaction, every word he had ever said, trying to find some clue I had missed. But no amount of questioning or self-blame was going to bring him back. It took time, but eventually, I realized something crucial. I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep letting him haunt me. The world was still turning, and I had to decide whether I wanted to move with it or be left behind. I woke up one morning, tired of the same old routine, the same spiraling thoughts, and I knew it was time for a change. The fog in my mind began to clear, replaced with a raw, urgent sense of clarity. I didn't need him to make my life meaningful. I didn't need validation from anyone anymore. I had been living for someone else for so long that I had forgotten what it meant to live for myself. And that realization was my first step toward recovery. I stopped calling him, stopped checking his social media, and stopped imagining what he was doing. There was nothing left there for me. I needed to rebuild myself, piece by piece, from the ground up. For the first time in a long time, I thought about what I wanted, not what I thought I should want, not what I thought would make someone else happy, but what I truly needed. I decided to focus on my career. I had always put my ambitions on hold for the sake of our marriage. His needs, his desires, his goals had always come first. But now, there was only me. I threw myself into work, took on new projects, and pushed myself further than I ever had before. For the first time, I felt proud of something I had accomplished on my own. The satisfaction I felt when I succeeded was more exhilarating than I could have imagined. It was a feeling I had missed, the feeling of standing on my own 2 feet. But it wasn't just work. I also started exploring things I had put aside for years, things that brought me joy before life became about compromise and routine. I began painting again, something I had abandoned when we bought our house and started filling it with our dreams. Each brushstroke felt like a piece of my soul returning. I would lose myself in the colors, in the strokes, in the silence that accompanied my creativity. It wasn't about making a masterpiece. It was about rediscovering It happened when I least expected it. I had spent so much time focusing on rebuilding myself, on picking up the pieces of a life that had been shattered, that the idea of anyone else in my life seemed impossible. I wasn't looking for love, I wasn't searching for validation, and I wasn't ready to let anyone into the space I had carefully constructed for myself. But then I met him. At first, it was just a passing encounter. He was easy to talk to, funny, and had a warmth about him that was impossible to ignore. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was still trying to focus on myself, on the life I was creating. But he kept showing up. Small conversations here and there turned into longer talks, and before I knew it, I started looking forward to seeing him. There was something refreshing about his presence. He wasn't complicated, he wasn't asking anything of me, and he certainly wasn't pressuring me. He just was. As we got to know each other better, I began to see the differences between him and my ex. He really listened when I spoke. He didn't offer empty promises or try to make me feel better about my situation with words that didn't mean anything. He was simply there, without expectation. And that felt like a breath of fresh air. But the more I spent time with him, the more I felt the weight of my past creeping in. The fear of vulnerability, the fear of being hurt again, came rushing back. How could I trust again? How could I give someone else my heart after everything I had been through? I was scared, terrified even. The last time I had given my heart away, it had been broken. And here I was, meeting someone who was kind, who genuinely cared, and yet I couldn't seem to let go of the fear that I might lose him too. But something inside me began to shift. I realized that I was holding on to my pain, holding on to my fear, in a way that was preventing me from moving forward. I was scared of being hurt again, but more than that, I was scared of living a life where I never took a chance. I had spent so long trying to protect myself from the pain of betrayal that I had forgotten what it was like to let someone in. One night, after a long conversation where we shared things about our pasts, our fears, our hopes, I looked at him and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. For the first time in ages, I wasn't thinking about the past. I wasn't thinking about the hurt, the betrayal, or the walls I had built around myself. I was just present. And I realized that maybe, just maybe, I was ready to take a risk again. It wasn't an easy decision. The doubts crept in, especially when I thought about how I had been so thoroughly burned before. But this time, it felt different. This time, I wasn't entering into something with the expectation of it being perfect, of it being a solution to my loneliness or pain. I wasn't looking for someone to fill the void. I had filled it myself. What I was looking for now was companionship, real companionship, a partner who saw me for who I was and accepted me, flaws and all. And so I allowed myself to fall. Slowly, carefully, but with a sense of liberation I hadn't known in years. Each day that passed, I became more certain of my decision. He wasn't perfect and neither was I. But we had something real, something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Connection. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I trusted someone with my heart again. But even as the relationship grew, there were moments when the past would haunt me. Doubts would creep in. Was this really the right decision? Was I really ready to give my heart away again? Could I trust that he wouldn't hurt me the way my ex had? These questions lingered, but instead of letting them control me, I faced them head-on. I learned that trusting someone didn't mean ignoring the pain of the past. It meant acknowledging it and choosing to move forward anyway. With him, I began to see that love didn't have to be perfect to be worth it. It didn't have to come without flaws, mistakes, or misunderstandings. What mattered was the effort, the intention behind it. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't alone in this world. I had someone who cared for me, who wanted to see me succeed, who loved me for who I was, not who I used to be. It was scary, yes. But the fear became less overwhelming as I embraced the vulnerability that came with love. I wasn't afraid of losing myself anymore, because I had already found myself. What I feared more now was the thought of letting fear dictate my future. I had already faced the worst kind of betrayal, the kind that shatters you. But it didn't break me, and it didn't define me. I had the power to choose how I wanted to live my life, and for once, I chose to take a chance on love again. I had come so far, and yet, the journey was far from over. When I first embarked on this path of healing, I thought it was all about moving past the pain, forgetting the betrayal, and finding happiness. What I didn't realize was that true healing didn't come from simply outrunning the past. It came from accepting it, integrating it, and allowing it to shape who I had become. I had spent so much time trying to fix myself, but in doing so, I forgot to appreciate the strength I had developed along the way. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to stop running. I stopped being afraid of the memories, the hurt, the scars that had once defined me. I began to look at them as reminders of how much I had endured and how much I had grown. I wasn't perfect. I was far from it. But I was real, and I was mine. I had fought through the darkness and emerged stronger, more self-aware, and more capable of loving myself than ever before. I had learned that healing wasn't linear. Some days felt easier than others, but there were still moments where the past crept up on me, where a fleeting thought would trigger an old wound or a simple memory would resurface, reminding me of the betrayal. But instead of running from it or drowning in it, I learned to sit with it. I allowed myself to feel the pain when it came and to acknowledge it, without letting it control me. The past no longer had the power to dictate my present. It was simply a part of my story, not the entirety of it. What struck me the most was how much I had underestimated my own capacity for resilience. I had believed for so long that I was broken beyond repair, that I would never be able to trust again, or love without fear. But I was learning that strength wasn't about never feeling weak, it was about rising every time you fall. And I had risen. Not just from the ashes of my marriage, but from the ashes of my own self-doubt and insecurities. It wasn't about pretending the pain didn't exist. It was about choosing not to let it define me anymore. I had discovered a version of myself that wasn't just a survivor of betrayal, but a woman who had learned to embrace her imperfections, to walk confidently with the knowledge that she was worthy, that she was